When it comes to self-development, no matter the method you use, the vital point is to practice. If you're ready to transform your life and claim the potential inside of you, then you're in the right place. Welcome back to the Vital Point Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Schechter. As a transformation coach and breathwork facilitator, I'm invested in making the dynamic landscape of personal evolution accessible. My goal is to inspire you to take action for yourself, because you have the capacity to evolve and bring your intentions and dreams into the world. There's never been more access to so many incredible modalities that can help you on your journey. This podcast will help you learn simple methods you can use to transform your life and share the stories and wisdom of practitioners who are doing the work so that you feel inspired to go and practice, because that's the vital point. And I'm still buzzing from my conversation with today's guest, Noel Coakley. Noel is a psychotherapist and meditation facilitator. He's also the director for the Boston Center for Contemplative Practice and an assistant director with Dharma Moon. And that's where I met Noel during the Dharma Moon Mindfulness Meditation Teacher Training earlier this year. He's a mental health counselor, former school teacher, and he's been practicing meditation since 1996. Very aligned with the Tibetan traditions and currently the Yungdrub Bon. He's been fortunate to learn from over 100 teachers, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama and His Holiness the 34th Menri Trizen. And we have this common teacher as far as David Nichtern. Such a wonderful conversation that we just had that dipped into really the heart of, Buddhist practice and the heart of what I think a lot of people experience when they have these unity consciousness experiences or experiences of non-dual consciousness within holotropic states or, plant medicine, psychedelic spaces. This experience that at our core, there's nothing to fix. There's nothing to improve or to work towards, that we are this Buddha nature innately. And that doing these different practices is really just removing the things that are keeping us from experiencing this truth, that, we do have this innate Buddha nature within us, all of us. And so we really got into that and talked about, how do we embody that in an authentic way without bypassing, without, intellectualizing, and also taking into account our unique Western upbringing and, some of the sort of societal or cultural ideas and beliefs that might come along with that. We also get into just really what it means to be embodied with these teachings, to use mindfulness in a very practical way, in a way that enriches the rest of our experience, and where we're able to take all of our experiences and the different parts of our personality and the different parts that we may have identified with, and use those as opportunities to continue to remove those obscurations, to use these opportunities as grist for the mill, as Ram Dass would say, and to trust and love all these parts of us. One of the things that I really liked about Noel's message that he came back to a few times was that we have to have the compassion and the wisdom. We can't just have the wisdom without compassion. Otherwise, that's where we get into some trouble in terms of bypassing or, intellectualizing what we're working through. What a wonderful conversation. And Noel was kind enough to offer a visualization compassion meditation for you to follow along with at the end of the episode. Definitely listen to the whole interview so that you can get some of the unpacking and sort of ground explanation of the practice. But I love doing these practices along with the guests, and I had a really beautiful experience. So my hope is that you are able to connect and work with this practice as well. And Noel has some upcoming uh, offerings, some classes, as well as some free offerings that we linked on the show page. So definitely check that out. Really just invite you to take a few deep breaths to connect to your breath and the present moment and drop in with Noel Coakley. Welcome to the Vital Point podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan. It's good to see you.
Yeah, definitely. We met during the Dharma Moon Mindfulness Meditation Teacher Training, and I have to say one of my favorite moments during the whole training. We just for the background for the audience, we had 5 different sort of weekend sessions, and then during each one of those weekends there would be like an intensive session where we would be meditating for like 3 hours, rounds of sitting and walking meditation. And one of my favorite moments was a night where you were leading, and I could tell, even though you had your microphone muted, there was progressively more rain and storming happening where you were. And it was so cool to me. Like I was really aware that you were trying to be like thinking about everybody else doing the meditation and really aware of muting your Zoom. And at some point you went inside, but just to me, like there's a vital point of meditation, right? Like you didn't go, it's, like how am I supposed to concentrate on my breath when there's this rain and probably thunder and lightning happening?
How dare this happen to me?
Right. Like just enjoying the beauty of the moment. And I was just imagining you sitting there and just being able to like experience that. For me in the desert, like now it's the monsoon season here, so we're getting some really cool rainstorms. But at the time it was like, oh, like I can imagine being there with you. It looked like you were like on your porch and just a beautiful sort of setting for that meditation.
Yeah, that was fun. It is really nice. It's lovely to sit out there when it's raining. The thunder was cracking, and I was worried how much is the mic picking up of this thunder, and I think it popped off on one of them during one of the sits. I was like, oh, I hope I didn't startle anybody with that. And then I had to move just because it started trickling. It started coming through the deck above me. It was soaking the computer and the microphone, so I had to move in. But that's one of those things, right? Like whether it's any given sit or you're teaching or whatever, it's like, who knows how that's going to go, right? And I think there's even something to that, right? Of the idea of like, okay, we get a nice cushion and sit in a room that's maybe like minimally distracting, and you got the temperature control, etc., right? You got some idealized thing. There's almost this way that's there's some ways that's not very helpful, right? It's at a certain point after you work with it in the lab, you got to go take it for a walk or go sit outside in the middle of the city, or like, because life is not that quiet. Mine is not. I don't think anybody's is a cozy room with AC and sound.
Right. Yeah, I work with a lot of people right now that are in a residential treatment center for behavioral health. And when I that's one of the things I always mention in my mindfulness group is like, this is the reason that I like to practice with my eyes open, because if I can only use these skills, like you said, like, I'm feeling upset or like, kind of discombobulated, I need to go sit in my room and turn the lights off and, get rid of all the sound and shut out all the, stimuli. Well, what good is that skill for me? Like, I want to be able to call upon this and be aware of it and be able to use it any time of the day, regardless of what's going on.
Yeah. In the thick of the mess. That's why when you see, like, when I mean, any of us idealize like some state or some set of conditions in meditation, right? Or the idea of like going on a retreat, which is good.
Mm.
It's not a bad thing. But then thinking like, oh, I got to be in the middle of the mountains. I got to be in the middle of wherever, some quiet, leave society situation in order to do this. It's a good thing to refamiliarize with this thing that we then hopefully carry outside of all that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's such a good reframe in, making that pivot to like whatever comes up is grist for the mill, or, I think like one of my favorite sort of teachings from, I believe, who's coming up for me, I'm sure somebody else has said it too, is Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, was like that adversity reveals your hidden faults.
Mm.
And like, so adversity is really that teacher of like really pointing out like, oh, this is where I've actually integrated what I'm practicing, and this is where I still have some work to do.
Yeah. Yeah. You remind me, we shared David Nichtern as a teacher, and he learned from Dilgo Khyentse for sure, or at least met him. And I always think of him saying, if you think you're enlightened, let me know how your Thanksgiving dinner goes or something like that. Or like, where are you Thursday afternoon at 3:00? To the same point, right? It's like just having it in these idealized areas. What good is that,
Yeah, absolutely. So you brought up David, our mutual teacher,
Yeah.
and there was something that I was curious about, because you're the main sort of, or at least the first teachers that you've worked with were of Tibetan descent,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. Yep.
Yeah. So what are some of the differences and maybe similarities between working with a teacher that, came from, Tibet or, India? Their culture is different. Maybe there's a language barrier there,
Yeah.
versus like working with David, because that's something that we both have in common, right? We both have David as a teacher, and I think our main teachers are Tibetan.
Right, right. Well, and then I think what we have in common with David as also students, us as students, and himself as a student, is having teachers that are Tibetan, right? So
Right.
he has gone through that as a student.
Yeah.
So and most, I think most of us, I mean, we're only talking a generation or two at the most,
Right.
as far as Western culture, really that being an available thing to us all. So I think a lot of people are in this situation, and my experience is, I'm not trying to dodge it and let's get into it a bit, but like it's been different with every teacher, in that each one of the teachers that I've known from that background has had a different view on the sort of like, no, we've done it this way, this is how we do it, and that's why we're going to do it that way. And the other side of the spectrum of like very open to different ways of talking about this, still keying in on like, let's learn it how we learned it first, but then you can take it and run with it. So really think there's like a person to person difference on
Mm.
how that's done, and so different teachers, I think, just have that kind of openness to hold on to the essence, and understand the situation being always different as to where you're sharing that, you know. So I think there is, I think, a difference as well with a lot of the Tibetan teachers are growing up in a situation where whatever your degree of spiritual practices, where you're still growing up in a culture where all the iconography is around you, it's all mixed in the water wherever you are, So I think that's probably a difference for us in our culture too. I wouldn't say spiritual iconography is mixed in the same degree. It's probably mixed in those cultures. Would you agree?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, like in Tibet, like it's just everywhere,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'm reminded of like teachers that I worked with when I lived there for a year that, they were just, I remember going on our sort of like our holiday break, and one of the teachers was like, cool, I'm going to go do prostrations for the next month. And I was like, you're gonna do what? And she was like, yeah, like I don't have the time to sit and do all the preliminary practices for retreat all at once,
Mm.
so I use my breaks from school to like get a chunk done.
Wow.
And I think that was such a cool idea, because, even I think for most people that are practicing, these traditions in the West, it's like, it's this very like all or nothing thing.
Yeah.
At least that's how I was. I
Yeah.
was like, oh, I want to go do a 3-year retreat. Well, I have to quit doing everything and just devote my life to doing this retreat, right?
Yeah.
Doing these preliminary practices, instead of the way it's just sort of integrated there. And like, even if you don't want to sit down and, meditate all day, or even, maybe feel like you have, a regular meditation practice, a teacher's going to be like, cool, here's some mantras that you can say, or, do circumambulations every day. And that's a mindful practice that you can do, or use this prayer wheel. Like, there's all these ways that the practices are so integrated into their culture.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's one thing I noticed that's different.
Yeah, agreed. And also a culture where, I mean, we live in the capitalist, very work centered, productivity culture, right? So like
Right.
the time of day, the time of your life to dedicate to that, you kind of got to do your own battle of making that space in our culture,
Right.
right? That might not be the same probably in other places, I presume. You don't have to make the argument for why you need that space in your life or you need that kind of time, and we still got to carve that out here, you
Yeah.
know. And I'm with you on that. That I remember at first, when first learning about stuff, I remember just thinking, well, there's only so far this is going to go because I'm not joining the monastery.
Mm.
I'm not moving out to the mountainside and going to be a hermit. So I guess this is going to be a limited situation. Um, and I've definitely come around on that. And I think a lot of us have just recognizing that that is one way to go, and there are people doing that. But actually, this life and the situation we have right now is actually a great situation as well. It's maybe even the ideal situation for us individually, right? Like this integrating into
Yeah.
different things. So we might not have the same kind of maps for how that looks, but it doesn't mean it's not an ideal situation for our practice, you know?
Yeah. 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 It gives, whatever we're going through gives us those opportunities, to practice and
Yeah.
to have those realizations. And yeah, and in a way, it's really rich with experience, right? It's like, you gotta figure out how to make this work in the middle of this, environment that we're
Yeah.
in and navigating, like you said, this, sort of capitalism driven sort of environment, rather than going and sitting in a cave, or, having people support you, like, oh, you want to go do retreat for 3 years,
Yeah.
cool, we'll help you out with that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
most people are just gonna kind of look at you funny, um if you say that here, like, well,
Yeah.
what are your plans for the next 3 years? Like an interview question. I'm gonna go be in retreat. Like,
Yeah.
what?
Would you be open to paying my rent in the meantime and sending
Right.
food, I'll come back with something to show. Yeah. Yeah. It's just a different situation, right? So, but it
Yeah.
must be the ideal one for us for whatever
Yeah.
reason.
And I think within, there's these sort of not sort of, there's these unbroken lineages of the within the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, right? And it's always been something that I've been fond of, as far maybe what's drawn me on a subconscious level to the Kagyu lineage, is
Mm.
as opposed to maybe sort of this, let's call it like idealized, very serene, like perfect monk sort of looking idea that a lot of people have when they think of the Buddha or Buddhists. The Kagyu lineage is full of these misfits,
Mm.
and like people that, like, started off as criminals, or started off with like a lot of
Yeah.
human material to work with,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
then figured out how to transform that into dharma, into, realization, and into compassion and wisdom. So yeah, it's like, it's really cool that we have these examples of sort of what we're working with, right? Like, I don't know, I can't speak for anybody else. I don't feel like a monk. I don't feel like I have very much realization. I feel like lots of days I feel like Isaac wrestling with the angel, of like trying to remember my Dharma practice and really like embody it,
Yeah.
than something that's just completely sunk in and, walking with this complete serenity.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. That's a good point. So I guess I should even say it's a totally different culture. What you brought up, those Mahasiddha stories are examples from those things, right? Of people just working with a situation like this one's a barkeep and this one's a prince and this one's this. Everyone's got their own trappings and everyone's got their own. This one's a musician, and then they got taught through that situation, right? Like not leave that and isolate, but here's how it is through your own life. I'm glad you brought that back up, man.
Yeah. And like to take it back to sort of the Tibetan culture, like there's so many examples that I ran into during my time there of people that really embody that. It's like, they're going to invite you in to their home and, feed you or, sit and have tea with you, or give you the front seat of the Jeep that you're going to be riding in for the next 8 hours, even though they're like a llama. And like, I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. Like, this is making me feel uncomfortable, so just these like wonderful opportunities to just really embody Dharma and just really like live it as an example.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if you would share a little bit about your work, just kind of looking over your bio. It was talking about that you've integrated Buddhist philosophy with, psychotherapy and psychology and, sort of as an alternative to some traditional, more traditional methods. So what does that look like and how did you arrive at that for yourself?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the way that I'm sure your work is for you, like as we learn all these things, you can't help but integrate it, right? It's like in there in your head, or in there in your practice. So inevitably it starts coming out. And so, I mean, the way I work is a reflection of my own learning and healing and continued recovery process in and of itself, right? It's like, so I can't isolate any one piece of that. So part of that was being a client in my own psychotherapy. Part of that was connecting with the lamas and the teachers. Part of that was reconnecting with my body, happened to be through yoga practice for me. Part of it was through loving, supportive relationships and reforming what that idea is, so all these pieces. And I don't know that you could take out any one. And I'm not saying that's the formula for everybody, but I think there's something like that that's a little bit more rounded and holistic, where there's no one thing that probably has everything we all need or has all the answers or something like that. And there is the risk of bopping around it too much. We have so much available to us now, even in any one of those categories, that you could sort of never get any depth on any of it. But on the other side, I think there's something about the holistic approach. We need some different things from different angles, or different ingredients that do different pieces of the work, and not any one of them is going to be the thing for us. So inevitably, I just started integrating that to how I talk with people. So much more often now, for instance, in psychotherapy, people are checking in what the embodied experience was. Like, I think 20, 30 years ago, that was not what psychotherapy was. It was all very up in the head, right? So now we're integrating, like recognizing the lack of separation. Even calling it mind-body connection is like a misnomer, right? It's like the mind-body.
Yeah.
It's a thing. Yeah. So
right, it is a thing.
So when people are sharing their experiences or talking about things, it's like trying to understand it from that level. And a lot of people are maybe feeling not integrated in that way, and learning how to integrate that. And then the meditation piece, on one level, at a minimum, I really don't know how to do the psychotherapy work without some kind of awareness practice, right? We can talk about things that have happened in the past, and we can sort of retrospectively tinker and look at things. But until we learn to go, oh, right now, look what's happening, right? You can take all that understanding of your experience thus far and have it inform understanding why you're experiencing right now the way you're experiencing it, I think it's hard to renegotiate your relationship with that experience or even transform that experience without I'm aware of what's happening right now. Right. So without even getting into full on Buddhist philosophy, I'm really not sure on how to do the psychotherapy work without like the awareness piece. Sometimes that means practice. And then for others, it might mean our shared space is like, okay, that awareness is not there yet. I'm sort of, for the time being, serving as that role, like sharing that aloud and bringing attention to that, so that then that awareness develops for that person, and then you back off it, and it goes on its own. But other times that could be certainly boosted by the practice. And then the whole philosophy piece, it's different for each person individually how much they want to go into that. But I think there are just certain things that Western psychology has some strengths in, and also things it doesn't address, just like Buddhist philosophy and psychology. There are strengths and things it doesn't address, and then there's overlap. So it's, for different pieces, it's good to go to different wells.
Yeah. As an amateur, I've always felt that there was a lot of overlap, and it was one of the strengths of Buddhism, is like it's less of like there is a religious aspect to Buddhism, but to me, it's always seemed like the religious aspect is more a feature of the culture in which Buddhism has been integrated with.
Yeah.
And so like that's why the lineages and traditions that sort of flourished in China have a very Chinese cultural feeling to them.
Yeah.
Tibetan would be similar in terms of and you could speak to this probably better than I can as a Bon practitioner, right? But the system is sound, and like it stands on its own without sort of the religious aspects of which the framework has kind of come through. Yeah. And that framework is super aligned to like a lot of really solid psychological sort of wisdom and values and things that can be integrated and implemented to improve people's lives.
I think you're right on. I can't remember the exact quote, but I've even heard the Dalai Lama say something around the lines of this being a psychology, a philosophy. It's also maybe a religion for some, but at its heart, I think you're right on. It's a psychology around the experience of reality we have, right? It's a psychology around or the disconnection from the direct experience of reality and what comes of that. So it's a psychological system.
Right.
There are still attributes of that, right, that are focused on there that aren't touched on at all in Western, and vice versa. It may be more in recent developments of Western psychology, but historically it hasn't had much of a take on the ultimate perspective in terms of like ultimate relative, right? It's very concrete of this relative reality of like I'm an independent individual self, and so it's strong on the developmental side, right? It's strong on the like develop a strong, healthy sense of self, but then you look at the Buddhist or the Bon psychology and it's like, whoa, self, there's the whole problem right there, right? So, and neither of them are wrong. There's just one's got a relative take on the self and one's got an ultimate. So that's just one example of where they come in different,
Yeah. Yeah. And that relative piece is important as well. Before we started recording, I was sharing something that was kind of coming up as a curiosity around that of, how do we keep sort of the ultimate view within Buddhism, right? That we inherently are not a fixed self, and that we have this Buddha nature at our core, right? That's what is solid, is like our innate nature, and everything else is, just sort of a result of our circumstances, which some people might call karma.
Yeah.
But, we could even just make it simpler than that and say like, the experiences that you've had in this lifetime, the family you've grown up in, the culture you've, grown up in, all those things that, you identify as that you, right?
Yeah.
but how do we keep that recognition and kind of like operate from that place in an authentic way that isn't like a form of spiritual bypassing, or I guess Trump and Rinpoche would say spiritual materialism, right? Where we're making that into the identity and not actually integrating the teachings.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're naming the two extremes that are important for us to be looking at, right? And
Yeah.
the antidote on those two extremes, I think, is you've got wisdom on one side and compassion on the other, right? And those things help keep us grounded or open, depending on which way we find ourselves leaning. I think for a lot of us, introducing this idea of Buddha nature, I know for me, I think for a lot of people, like we're walking around with this story about what's wrong with us, or what's missing, or what's the deficit, or like if I just work hard enough, or if I just do this thing, or just change this about me, like then I'll be okay, or these are the particular conditions I need to meet in order to be lovable, but all of me is not lovable as is. So on that side of the thing, there's both compassion work to learn to love ourselves relationally and be in loving relationships, but there's also that ultimate view of Buddha nature, like, well, what if it's that there is on some level of our being something that's already perfect and couldn't be fucked with, like you can't mess it up, unstainable. And we learned all the stories on top of it, that there are the deficits, or there are the conditions. We learn conditional love, so we build a whole personality, our whole life around trying to meet those conditions. So I think there's something for us to unlearn about that, which is helpful for that ultimate perspective of like, look, we're not any of these stories. We're not limited by any of these thoughts. We're not limited by this habit of mind that we keep going to. There's something beyond that could never be touched by any of that. But then on the other side, you mentioned bypassing. There's a way that we can not deal with any of that. You got to get real intimate with the knot that we've made in order to realize that we're not that. You can't just go like, skip that, or let everything come up that comes up without any responsibility for it and be an asshole and be like, well, it's Buddha nature. Like,
Right.
And there's a lot of dodging around that for sure. And I think we're all going to do this, because a lot of that knot is the pieces that are hard to look at, right? And we're guarded and defended, and it's vulnerable to go there, or we don't like that part of ourself or something like that. So you don't want to look at it, or we don't want to look at what we're capable of. So some balance of the two, the compassion and the wisdom. And then if we can go too far on that wisdom side, right, get checked out, get nihilistic, too spaced out, like with no grounding and no compassion for the fact that like you can have that view fully intact. You don't lose the relative experience. It doesn't surpass the relative, or it's not better than, just the other side of the coin, right? So we can lose that compassion for like, could be totally enlightened. I'm still going to experience nullness and Jonathanness. We have to hold that compassion. Like, as long as I got this body, we're gonna feel that. So there's danger on both sides, right?
Absolutely. For me, there was that was one area where that, adversity came up as an opportunity to like re-examine some things, some hard truths within myself, right? Is, I've, I there's a part of me that wishes that I had been practicing meditation for 20 years solid, but I've been practicing Buddhism for 20 years.
Yeah.
And, a few years ago when I started to go through this sort of, let's call it spiritual awakening in sort of the modern vernacular, I really only had my mindfulness sort of resources. And I had this intellectual view of, what we're talking about, right? Of non-duality, of not an independent self, and sort of this meta ultimate view. And so when things would come up that were uncomfortable, instead of like really being connected to them, being present with them, being, feeling them, it's almost like I could just apply this lens of like, well, this isn't really happening. And if I just watch it, eventually it's going to move through me and be gone, just like a sort of like a mundane thought of like, if I'm sitting there and I'm meditating and the thought comes up like, man, a cheeseburger sounds really great right now. Like that doesn't derail my whole meditation experience. You
Yeah.
know, it's really easy to like sort of label that as thinking and come back to my breath. Right. And then I found myself in this place where things started to thaw out. You know, trauma that was stuck in the body started to like come up to the surface because I wasn't suppressing it any longer.
Yeah.
And I was doing more introspective and investigative work on myself
Yeah.
through various means. And all of a sudden I was in this place where I was like, oh shit, the mindfulness isn't really helping me right now.
Yeah.
And it's not even that the mindfulness wasn't helping. It's just that I was bypassing my authentic experience, which was, you know, in that moment, experiencing suffering, experiencing like the pain of, you know, these things that had happened earlier on in my life. And the only resource that I had was to try to like bypass my way through it.
Yeah.
And it stopped working.
Stopped working.
And it was really scary, you know, when it first started happening, because it was like, oh shit, what do I do now?
Yeah.
Here's this tool that I've had for so long that I've relied on, and it's not helping me. It doesn't feel like it's cutting through.
Yeah.
So what am I going to do now to change that, you know?
In your description there, you're also redefining how we're looking at how that's helping us, right? I think you're naming some of that view that we all might come into of like, oh, mindfulness or meditation, it's going to help like make thoughts or emotions or traumatic things or whatever it may be that comes up that go away. Like it's somehow going to flatten it out and make it all like quiet space in there. And that's right, such a common misconception for us all. And then it starts to get maybe quiet, or you start creating enough of a safe environment in that internal relationship where like, oh, that stuff I defended against, stuff I protected, understandably, now it's safe enough to come up, you know? And then, yeah, in terms of it's not helping, like it's not going away. No, but it's helping like, oh, this can get the light of day now. I get to feel this now. And then I get to see this and hold it lovingly now. Very helpful, but uncomfortable, you know? And I think for all of us, and then especially in a world where meditation or mindfulness practice aside, we don't get to just sit in our quiet and feel things, right? There's stuff pulling us every damn direction outside of our mind, never mind our own mind. It takes some getting used to go, oh, I'm just going to sit in this. I'm just going to be in this mud. But that's the key, right? That's the healing.
Yeah, we're not encouraged to sit with that, to be with it. And yeah, you're right. You know, just as you were saying that, it just kind of dawned on me of like, oh yeah, this is what I teach my clients now. It's like, especially within the context of like breath work and you know, sort of healing, is like, you've got to trust the process. You've got to open to whatever's happening and be willing to sit with it. And maybe that's not all going to happen today.
Yeah.
That's okay too.
Yeah.
You know, it is a process, and it is something that you learn to feel more comfortable and trust going into. But yeah, it is an opportunity to like move through something, to release it. I had I had that experience last week with a client. Like, you know, it was their first week in the treatment center, and they came to, you know, probably my most activating group, where we're doing a lot of like activating breath work. And they, you know, I gave the group like a bunch of different resources of like, hey, you've got to trust yourself here. Everybody's nervous system's different.
Yeah.
The key is to find that edge and push a little bit against it without getting overwhelmed. And here's some things that you can do if you start to feel overwhelmed. And in the group, I could tell they were going through something, but they weren't doing any of the sort of, you know, supportive resourcing. So I'm like, okay, great. They're going for it. This is great.
Yeah.
And then after the group, they were really upset. And I, you know, kind of checked in with them, and they said, well, why is this happening? Like, this is not what I expected. I thought I was coming here to like get away from this kind of stuff.
Veg out.
And it was like, hey, like, I totally get it. And I understand how challenging and like kind of ungrounded this feels right now.
Yeah.
And you're doing really good work, and like this stuff is going to sit there in the body until you're willing and able to like move through it and be with it and love it. And I know this isn't what you expected, but the fact that it came up to me means that you feel safe enough to go there, and that it was ready to go. Right. Like, because we don't always get into the deepest, darkest parts of like the shadow or the suppressed stuff right off the bat. Right. Like we really have to make ourselves or allow ourselves to go there sometimes.
Yeah. There's a reason why it's in the shadow, right? Or there's a reason why it is called that. And those defenses, those protective parts, that hiding it from ourselves was at one time well-intended and loving.
Yes.
Right? I mean, it was, so we don't get upset at that.
Yeah.
It's like that part, if we think about parts where, that part is trying to protect me, but it's just like a battle axe that doesn't have the wisdom to know that this is not the time. So how do we love to say thank you? You don't have to go anywhere, but we're good. I got this now.
Right.
And like you said, I think that I think about that with trauma work as a whole. It's a combination of like, okay, I've got the skill sets and some things that I've learned that work for me if things were to come up and I would feel like that was getting out of hand, right? So there's that kind of like learning, and that's a little bit different for everybody. We can throw suggestions out there, but that's a little different for everybody, right? And then you've got that combined with that, you name that safety, that sort of internal relationship environment, which someone can help you with by holding that, like you hold for people when they're doing breath work, or we hold that space. But then everyone's got to get to a spot on their own where internally they've got the internal space that says, I can feel that safety. I can attune like that. I can create that secure attachment environment, attachment in the Western sense, not the Buddhist sense. Like it's that secure relationship environment within which it's safe to go to the darkest places. And I still love that. And I can hold it. And I know what to do. There's enough spaciousness to hold that. I think that goes back to the wisdom and compassion. There's enough space to hold what comes up with compassion without having to look away or skip it or be partialized about it. And then it gets its time of day. That kid in there who's been lovingly protected by the battle axes gets to speak his or her mind and share what they're experiencing and feeling. And you go, all right, wow, all right, I hear that now. And I got you, and I can get you in a different way if you want to do that. What do you need?
Yeah. 100%. Couldn't agree more. And, it's so like wrapped up in my work. It's like, there's some people that I'm working with that, and I'm sure you're similar, that are like interested in psychedelics. And sometimes I go like, well, hold on, like before we blast off to Jupiter, like let's get into orbit. Like let's feel our feet on the ground. Let's let's figure out how to get to the moon and back, like let's get in touch with the body and the breath and start to dip into these areas without taking away that like whole sovereignty of being able to go, okay, that's enough for today. Like I'm going to go back to a more grounded like breath, a more, I can orient myself. I can open my eyes and, all these resources that I have that kind of go out the window to a certain degree if once you eat a big bag of mushrooms or drink ayahuasca or something like that, right? And it's not that those things don't have a good set and setting or that they don't work or helpful for some people, but it's like let's be grounded and resourced in this work, right? Not just like, oh, I heard this is what is going to help me, so I'm just going to jump into that.
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing it up. This is obviously, the Renaissance is happening, and for better and worse, or whatever. And it is coming up a lot in therapy space, and I think we've got on the one side the danger of I'm going to take the magic pill and that's going to do the work, which is never true, right? And we've got some of these intense means, right? Whether it be some meditations or some breath work or some psychedelics or any number of things that can speed up things that might take longer without some help, right? So
Right.
there is that bonus, but I think what I'm hearing you say too, without integrating that into some, all right, how do we build up some skill sets and build up that relationship and build up like some sovereignty first and know what we're going into any of that for, and how are we going to come out of that and take the wisdom from it without now being attached to the intense mean or to the special state. Yeah, but yeah, so I think we're all learning how to use these big chainsaws. You know,
Right.
they're good tools for things when they're used right and well directed and skillfully used, but also fucking dangerous. You know, maybe
Right.
devastating.
Yeah, even with breath work, like a lot of people, including myself, get our start with these really expansive kind of holotropic states
Yeah,
that can be achieved with the breath.
yeah,
And we're sort of getting out of our body. We're not really being connected to having our feet on the ground and our eyes open and being in this mindful present awareness. I've thought it, and I've had so many clients come out of their first couple, big sort of peak breathwork experiences, and they're like, oh, is that what meditation's supposed to feel like? Because they're getting into like such a sort of like a yin yoga yoga nidra type of like a yogic trance where
yeah,
like all of a sudden the thoughts are gone
yeah,
and you're just in this space of like stillness, and you're kind of outside of space and time, and you might have some really cool insights that come up in that space. But like for me at least, the contrast to my normal mind and being in that space is really, really stark. And
yeah,
it's like, whoa, this is different. um and so I think it's really easy to sort of get attached to that blasting off or not being in the body, when there's so much more value in like, hey, let's learn about awareness. Like, let's learn to connect with the breath. Let's connect with what's happening in the body. Let's learn to use the breath to help regulate the nervous system,
yeah,
so that when you are doing this work, whether it's with plant medicines or breath work or different advanced meditations, there's something that you can take away from that.
yeah,
You're more present with it because your nervous system's more acclimated, more present, and then there's more opportunity to integrate it.
yeah,
Like, I always think about like going on a roller coaster as a kid. When I think about it now, I might have like this very brief glimpses of a memory of that really intense experience. Right at the time, it was intense. When I got off the roller coaster, it was like, oh fuck, what was that?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
that was crazy, right? And then what is that like the next day, the next week, the next month, 20 years from now? Like,
yeah,
I I don't remember much from that. So it's like, I don't want anything, whether it's ayahuasca or breath work or any other modality, if my intention is to do some work with it,
yeah,
I don't want it to end up as that experience.
yeah,
Like, I want to be able to what am I learning from this? What am I integrating from it? How is this being embodied in the rest of my life?
yeah, yeah. Well said. We don't want to get attached to that. And I had a teacher who used to say that the special states like bliss and luminosity, non-conceptual stillness, like depending on how we're oriented, if we're heavy thinkers, we get caught on non-conceptual stillness. If we're not usually in our body and relaxing, you get caught up on bliss. Or if you're visually oriented, you get caught up in the luminosity. It's like, and that none of those are like the things to get attached to, but those are the biggest, those become hurdles. At first, just getting some practice going is the hurdle, and distraction and sleepiness and laxity and all that stuff. And then down the line,
Yeah.
the special states are the distractions, and people go, oh, this must be it. This is what I'm looking for. And it's just
Right.
like, you're going West Coast and that's just the exit to Vegas. Like, keep going. It's just like, keep going. Don't get distracted, you know? And
Right.
I had the preliminaries, as you were talking about this, come to mind too. I've come to learn, I think that's the place for these things, Nundro and preliminaries. And I think we're finding our ways of doing that in the West. I think therapy might be one of those types of things, but I had a teacher who used to just teach pointing out instructions, go right to Dzogchen, within, people would start within a week, and by the end of the week, they'd be doing these things. And on the one hand, that's great, but not surprisingly, then it became this special thing that happened on the retreat. And this same particular teacher would advocate for, like, oh, you don't need preliminaries. We have these instructions that like point out the emptiness of all that. Why would you need to do that? Da, da, da. And there's some truth to that ultimately, but that's not true for 99.9% of us, right? We got to like
Right.
create these conditions for any realization or awakening or anything like that to actually stick. So like all the preliminary practices from the traditional paths, and then maybe I wonder what you think about this, what maybe our versions of this are there, but they're all little angles on undoing that knot.
Mm.
Any one given preliminaries doesn't take care of all the knot, but it's gonna loosen a couple pieces from one angle
Yeah.
or another, right? It's gonna start loosening particular attachments or some of our habitual ways of thinking that are not serving. So that then when introduced to something else, okay, maybe that's actually gonna land. Maybe that's got fertile ground. It's gonna be a little bit more familiar and accessible without all the knots.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what's coming up for me with that is the value of working with someone that can uh, be a support or a guide or a teacher or a guru. We can put these different labels on it, but um, within the context of Buddhism, they talk about there being 84,000 different methods and teachings. Right now, whether that's literal,
Hmm.
I don't tend to think of it as literal.
Right,
I
right.
tend to think of it as there's this myriad, almost endless number of different sort of things about being human and neuroses and humanness,
Yeah,
right? And so there's an antidote for each of those. And just when we're whatever situation that we're in, most of the time it's hard for us to see those things that are so close to us.
yeah,
It's like being able to see what's on my forehead. I can't see that until I look in the mirror, right?
yeah,
And that therapist, that guide, that coach, that teacher is acting as that mirror, and
yeah,
they can sort of skillfully guide us or give us suggestions about, hey, well, I think this practice might be really helpful for this thing that you can't see because it's so close to you,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Whereas you might stumble upon that through a book or through practice, but how much faster is that going to go working with someone that can be holding up that mirror all the time rather
yeah.
than just hoping you're going to like find your way into it,
Right, right. Yeah, lovingly to tell you when you have shit on your face. I like how you said that.
Right.
Right, like
Yeah.
lovingly and skillfully, and then yeah, to not have to think I've got to therefore learn the 84,000, and if not, then I'm not going to get it.
Mm.
But there's a
Mm.
bundle of
Mhm.
those for each of us that would be most
Right.
effective. Um,
Yeah.
I think you're right. It does help to have those like loving teachers who can hold the kind of space as free of their own obscuration on your experience as possible, right?
Right.
Not totally free from that unless you're totally awakened and enlightened, but ideally someone who's it's more minimal, or and they're at least aware of, this is how I tend to obscure and this is how I throw my stuff and trip on people. Let me try to not do that in this space and lovingly share. How about this? Yeah.
Yeah. So now that we've established that, this, I think my next question is going to be a little bit ironic or funny. Um, what are some of the things that new practitioners should be aware of? Or maybe a different way to say it would be, if you could go back and talk to yourself as a new practitioner, like what's the advice that you'd give yourself? Like, what are the things that you wish you knew back then that you know now?
I'm going to loop back to the Buddha nature piece, just in that I know when I first approached practice and mindfulness and Buddhism and all of it, I was still coming from this, I think it's a Western perspective, like the self-improvement path idea, like not yet good enough or not yet meeting those conditions, but if I work hard enough, I'll get to that. And I think that the Buddha nature notion, which is the idea, just to share for others, right, that we're all naturally endowed with the potential for these loving qualities of heart mind. They're always right there, beyond our thinking mind, beyond what we believe that self is. There's something wider than that that's already there, like as standard issue sentient beings. The variable is only like whether or not we've realized that, and the degree to which we realize that, the more we can operate out of that mind space, and then natural qualities come of that. So it flips the idea of like what improvement or what self-improvement is, or why we're doing any of the practices. It's not that if I keep doing mindfulness or keep practicing compassion or keep realizing emptiness, any of those things, then I'll be the thing. The improvement is the idea of being able to see through the obscurations more and more and more, or removing more and more, not getting rid of even all of them, but I can see through more and more of those clouds. And I'm more and more familiar with this thing that's already right here that could never be improved upon or get worse. Yeah. Right. So it just flips the idea of improvement. Like, so to me, even if you're just starting mindfulness, if we're going at it with the idea of like, oh, if I just get mindful, if I just get more concentrated and more aware, like, then I'll be a better person, then I'll be a good this, then I'll be good that, like, that's going to keep reiterating that conditional love thing. It's going to keep that trip going. It's going to keep it to like a certain outcome. And I think if we can all unhook from that a little bit more, that to me is the heart of it. I say I'm a recovering Irish Catholic, and I don't believe this is the heart of the messaging from there, but to speak from how it was taught to me by those in my spiritual world that taught it to me, the message was like, you're bad. You better try to be better and make up for that. But don't think you're as good as, you know, so-and-so, because then you're arrogant. Like, there was nowhere, it was a trap. There was nowhere to go. And it taught me how to be guilty, you know, and feel shitty about myself. And so I feel like I'm flipping, and that, even if that's not your faith tradition, I think that is pervasive in our culture, that is permeated, right?
I'm laughing because I think a lot of us have that, or maybe it's just the German Catholic in my, ancestry that I'm finding, a similarity to in what you're saying. Because I remember feeling like I just one distinct memory that I have, and this is a couple of years before I decided to join the Dharma Moon training program, was sitting and meditating in the morning with my partner, with my girlfriend, and we get done and she said, you should teach meditation. And literally, without even thinking about it, my like first thought, best thought response was, to who? Like like I've really glossed on to, or glommed onto the whole like guru worship sort of part of the Tibetan tradition of like, the teacher is up here, they're sitting on a throne, and even the ones that are fully enlightened and realized, they're going to sit there and go, I'm just a humble monk. Like, I don't really know anything, but since you guys asked me, I'll tell you, right? Like, there's such humility and like humbleness to that approach. And so I was like, well, shoot, if this fully realized being is like taking on that level of humility, what where do I come in? Like, what kind of hubris do I have to be able to teach these things? Like, I love this. There's like a poetic way that it's said in some of like the traditional prayers, or sort of like prayers to the person's guru, where they say something like, I'm just like a parrot that's just repeating words that I've been taught, like, as opposed to you that like has really integrated and is embodying this Buddhahood, right? And so I always thought about that, like, okay, I can be a parrot and like teach some mindfulness, like how to focus on your breath and things like that, but what right do I have to put myself in that same category?
Yeah, there is rethinking of that guru word has been a little thorn in things, right? And that has been severely abused, right? So it's good for us to have the eye up on that. But then you go on the opposite end of the spectrum. I don't know if this is like a particular New England or Boston thing, but there's also like the cultural overlay of like, oh, look at this fucking guy. Who's he think he is? You know, it's like, oh, here he comes. You know, it's like whatever topic, like God forbid you're anything other than like completely self-deprecating. They're like, look at this guy, right? Yeah. So it's like we've internalized this, like, don't ever think anything good about yourself, or you got anything to offer anybody, or possible, you know. Yeah. But then there's, you know, I have my root teacher now. He's Bon Geshe, and he refers to himself as a Tibetan dog regularly, and he's just like, I'm just a Tibetan dog. Don't listen to me. But look, this is what this says. And he's humble. He's definitely, I would say, more realized than he gives himself credit. But I think there's this flip of recognizing, right, where the role of the teacher is actually not very important, right? It's like a minimal, the job of a decent signpost. Like, it's good to have the signpost. It's good for it to be clear. You know, it shouldn't be covered with a lot of shit and mud. It should clearly point out where it's needing to go in the way that's best for the person who's seeing it. But that's it. You know, you're not giving anybody anything. And it's not that like any one teacher they're special. They've got the special stuff. So if you hang around with them, interact with them, they're going to give you the special stuff. Like, that's how we've propped them up too high. And then people prop themselves up too high, and it gets really bad and dangerous, and we don't trust ourselves. And the whole point is that they're pointing out what's already true about you, and then you step away, right? Or you say, like, here, I'm just sharing the practice instructions, and then I'm going to get out of your way. I've got nothing to give you that you're not going to discover on your own. I think healing from the trauma of not feeling very good about ourselves, combined with really understanding the role of the teacher and not being anything more than it really is or should be, can help us take a better spot in this realm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see that, you know, all the time, you know, in these other contexts that I work in as well, you know, with breath work or, you know, integration coaching. It's like, I'm there holding the space. I'm not there to heal you.
Yeah.
And even, you know, one of my breathwork mentors during our training, he said, you know, just get used to the idea that you're basically a pillow jockey. Like, you're there to hold pillows so that when people start flailing around, they're not going to hurt themselves. Divorce yourself of this idea that you're doing anything. You know, and I still see it, you know, people come out of an experience and they're like, thank you so much for that. And I'm like, you did that. Like, you did the work. You know, like, it's not me at all, you know. Oh yeah, but you know, you created the container, blah, blah, blah. Okay, thanks. You know, you're right. And I'm not inside your mind, like, working all this stuff out. You know?
You're naming a crucial difference in anything that we'd all be susceptible to is like, who doesn't like hearing something nice said to them, or like, thank you? So it's easy to get sucked into that whole thing, but you have to do what you just did, is like immediately reflect, like, that would be a misrepresentation of what happened here, right?
Right.
I held a safe space for something for you to do, you know, entirely on your own with others around.
Right. And maybe from the, you know, to sort of rewind what we were talking about, maybe that's a reason for these great Tibetan teachers to be so humble and to practice that much humility, is like, it's not one person coming up to them after a breathwork circle being like, oh my God, you know, there's people bowing to them all the time. There's people putting them in the best seats, giving them the best of everything. I would imagine that there's a lot of temptation there. At least putting myself in that situation of like starting to believe some of that stuff, like believing, what people are saying about me being so great. And we're seeing that now in the midst of this renaissance of like, people where their ego or their narcissism or some of their human traits are getting amplified by the set and setting that they're in, whether that's the medicines they're working with or the community that's surrounding them. And it's easy for them to kind of step up onto that pedestal instead of being like, oh, hold on a second, let me reevaluate and do some more work.
Yeah. To use that skillfully to show like, oh, look how both sides of this relationship playing out right now is not serving either of us, anybody. Like, how do you lovingly point that out and go, like, we're not going to do that here. We're not going to do that, And let's not, I think let's also not pedestalize the Tibetan or any other culture here, because it's rife with all that shit too, right? It all happens in all these spaces, for better and worse. We could find examples of all of these.
Yeah. I liked when David was on the show, the topic of guru yoga came up briefly, this practice of, kind of visualizing yourself as this idealized guru, figure. And the point that I brought up was that it's really easy for us in the culture and, environment that we've grown up in as Westerners to go awry with that, or like, sort of apply some of that Western thinking or guilt or idealism onto that idea. And he pointed out that you're not like, during the guru yoga practice, the guru is not separate from you. They're looking the same direction of you, like sort of overlaid onto you, right? It's not that you're looking at them and they're separate. You're really, you're just really visualizing and embodying all those qualities that are also within you. Right.
That's right. And so most of us with those visualizations, or like you can see a Tonka that's over there, all those visualizations or representations are meant to be like, not as a thing out there, give me some of the stuff, but they're representations of internal characteristics that we've lost familiarity with, that we don't see that in ourselves, right? And then with guru yoga, I mean, there's two words that may be worth unpacking for the audience, in that, I know I have my cultural reactivity to both of those words, and have an idea of what that looks like and what that means, right? And like, so guru has come to mean some teacher that's get propped way up, right? Which it means that in one way, right? And then yoga we come to associate with like the embodied physical aspect of hatha yoga practice, right? And guru in and of itself means the thing that points out reality, right? So sometimes that's a person that points out reality and acts from that. Sometimes it's a teaching that's our guru. Sometimes it's, you're walking by and you see a flower the right way, and that's the guru. And then it's our own mind, our own experience that is that reality and never separate from. So the job of all the external gurus is to point out internal guru. So the job of all the external reality reminders and helpers is to help familiarize ourselves with that reality that we are too, right? So we do this thing where that's become a personified idea, right? It's like of a person that is a special person, and we lift them up. And then yoga just means union with. So it just means union with reality. The reality is that I'm that too, not in the egoic way, but like my ultimate nature is that, just like everybody else. And this example I'm using to help familiarize with. So, and we're just seeing each other in that way.
Beautifully said. And, what are some other ways that we practice visualization in more of a sort of Western or American, kind of context that we could use to explain some of these more traditional Tibetan, concepts and practices?
I think the earliest traction, the idea of visualization and using our imagination has got in our culture is sports performance, right? People rehearsing performance in some capacity, right? So you create this neurological groove that then is available to you spontaneously. Then your mind can fall into, it's already familiar with. And our mind, doesn't know the difference between I'm experiencing this right now or I'm experiencing this in my visual, right? I mean, anybody who's had anxiety knows how that works, right? You're imagining something deeply that's not happening right now, but our body mind is responding as though it is. So there's really no difference.
Right.
And so that kind of, I think, performance visualization is something people might be already familiar with, that kind of format. And we can use, it's the same idea as what comes up in Tibetan visualizations, where it's like, okay, right now there's already a rehearsed pathway. There's a habit of mind, a way I view myself, a way I view other people. Maybe it's a way I view reality. There's a habit going. How am I going to transform that habit? By familiarizing myself with maybe what else it could look like or what it really looks like over and over and over again. And maybe I don't see myself as that yet, so I need to use some other model for that. And by visualizing that other model, right? So maybe I don't see myself running as fast and winning that race, but I can picture that athlete who's just like crushing it. I can visualize them and go, yeah, like that, like that, and become intimately familiar with that. And then I, at some point, fuse with that and realize, well, I'm that too. That's in me. I can do that. And now I can see me doing that. I can play that out. And you've got that whole schema, you'd call it in Western psychology. Like, I've got a schema already for who I am, what the world is, what other people are, and it's locked, or feels locked. It's just a mental habit. So by rehearsing these other mental habits deliberately, now we start to tip the scale of the likelihood of the spontaneous availability of this practice rehearsed one. Right. And I think, to me, one of the most important ways we can do this, and it's similar to Guru Yoga, it's similar to the refuge field, is to bring to mind these perfectly loving moments. I'd say relationships, but every relationship is complicated, and we might want to focus on a particular moment within those relationships. For some, it might be with a spiritual being. For some, it might be a loved one. For some, it could be a perfect stranger or their dog, or it's a place that they go. And by dipping into that memory, you start to re-experience right here, right now, the direct felt sense of that unconditionally loving field. Right? And that direct experience, now we're going maybe past our thinking mind and past the limiting aspect of our conventional mind. And that's helping us dip into, sometimes they call it the natural state of mind, or that Buddha nature, that wider loving field. By remembering our way back to those moments and realizing that we don't give each other love, but we hold space for that love to remain unobstructed. Right? So nobody gave it to me, even though that's the language we use and that's how it feels. I'm either getting it or I'm not getting it, or meeting those conditions or not. We just hold the space so it remains unobstructed. So it doesn't even have to be actually with that person. I can bring up that memory and start to feel what it's like in that space again. And now I'm in that space, because that's always right here anyway, always available underneath the things I think obscure that. So it's sort of like a bank shot. You call that loving being, that loving entity, that loving place, that loving moment, and then you just start to feel naturally in the body. And then you can drop that memory, that visualization, and shift from your focus of the visualization to the focus of the direct felt sense right here, right now.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up that last part, because that has been, I think, for me, one of the major changes between trying to wrap my head around some of these practices 20 years ago and how I feel like I'm practicing them now. It's not just getting caught up in trying to imagine these elaborate visualizations. It's, how does that feel?
Yeah.
And maybe, I wonder if you would agree, the felt sense would be even more important than being able to have this elaborate visualization.
The whole elaborate visualization is for the sake of the direct felt sense.
Yeah.
Any
Yeah.
thoughts you'd have, visualization is a thought. It's just a different kind of thought, right? So all those thoughts are to evoke that direct felt sense from our natural state of Buddha mind. So yeah, once that's evoked, the rest of it can go. It can go. It's not. It's your ride to the thing. You can get off the ride.
I don't want to steal your vital point from you, but that one we could probably put a pin in as the vital point of this conversation.
Right on.
In my opinion.
Yeah, right on. I'm with that.
That landed so well to me. And, it's one of the things I like about doing this podcast is like, sometimes, there's like almost like these real time sort of analysis or like, integration that's happening of like, oh, wait, actually, oh yeah, that's totally really good stuff. I gotta, come back to that one and really think about how I'm integrating that more. So yeah, I really appreciate you naming that because it helped to bring some things into focus for me. So since we've talked about kind of the intellectual aspect of it, would you be okay with offering like a practice that the audience could follow along with?
Yeah, you bet. And
Awesome.
I'll just
Great.
to say a couple more things about it before we go into it.
Yes.
In and of itself is that, the last piece of that is, we visualize what brings us into that felt space. We can let go of that and be in that felt space, and that's what we focus on. But it's understandable that for any of us, or at any given day, that we all have a lot of reactivity to that, actually. Right? So sometimes that space is heavily defended, heavily guarded. It doesn't feel safe because of the conditional loving that we may have, got habitual. There's going to be reactivity of some form to that space. So number one, I want to name that. So to not only expect it, but if it feels like we're done with that, then you stop. We're done with that. That's okay. Right? So you trust, like you were talking about the breath work earlier, everyone's got to trust their own intuition on whether or not it's a time and place to go there.
Yeah.
What I'll say beyond it not feeling the time and place or feeling re-traumatizing is that those pieces that come up in reactivity to it, those are the parts that actually need the most love. Right? So now we're engaging in this mindfulness. It's a mindfulness practice, mindful of that unconditional loving awareness space that we just evoked from ourselves by that bank shot of that loving moment environment. And then from the perspective of being that unconditional loving space, rather than identifying with those defended parts, that's what a lot of our personality and our self is built around. So rather than identifying with that, can we hold that and allow that arise and be held from the perspective of being that unconditional loving space? Watch when the mind wants to reduce itself from being any one of those parts, and you just let it come and go. It doesn't mean you have to hold on to it tight either and like squeeze it in that literal sense, but you let it be seen and let it come and go without fully developing into its whole strategy. And so that habitual reactivity to that unconditional loving space can learn to unwind itself, and it doesn't have to stick the same way.
Amazing. There's this book that isn't quite Buddhist, but is very, again, with that overlap. I think there's a lot there that's come up for me a lot this year is this book called The Untethered Soul. And what you just described in terms of like being able to discern the letting go process and allowing that to happen as quickly as feels comfortable to the nervous system and to the body. Just being, like he says in it, like, hey, one lesson that you'll learn as you go through this path is like the sooner you can let things go and not try to figure them out or like really dive into it, like the understanding the nuances of it. Just let it go.
Yeah.
It's just something that, has value in it. And again, to go back to, like doing that in an authentic way, in a way that we're not bypassing.
Yeah.
I think is always the trick for me.
Would you say from this description that you're talking about reading, that letting go could also be, you could describe that as not identifying with something,
Yep.
not fusing with something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think for me, like the more, when I start to have that awareness of how I'm reacting, or like where I've identified as this thing, I start to see it so much clearer. Like, I'll give you a great example. Like, just recently, I sort of came to this insight about this pattern that I have of when I feel like I'm going to get hurt by somebody, I'll just push them away before they have the opportunity to hurt me.
Yeah.
I never saw any of that whole like A to B to C to Z like sequence.
Yeah.
It was always just like, well, fuck that person.
Yeah.
Like, and now that I've seen it, I'm seeing it crop up in all these like little microtransactions or different aspects of my life. And it's almost like once you see it, you can't unsee it,
Yeah. And the intention of that, however, that without having to pinpoint how that kicked off, was to do what for you?
To keep me safe.
Right. So it was trying to love. It's still trying to love you, right?
Yeah. I'm going to keep myself safe by like forcefully removing the danger, the potential, or I'm seeing as danger from this situation. Like, you can't hurt me if I like get away from you first.
Yeah. And it's not right. We're going to somehow learn to like take that part of ourself and now murder it, right? Or like club it into submission.
Yes.
But it's going to keep showing up at the party. We're going to go, thanks. I love you too. And we're good. And we're good.
Yeah. I see you.
We don't have to be that, but thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Right. Yeah. And there might even be some new role for, like that might give me good, I'm trying to think of like a concrete example, but it's like we can sort of retask those parts once we get to know them and unburden them, to use, like the language of IFS, for instance, rather than like what you're saying, trying to kill them, trying to get them out of our experience. It's like, okay, cool. Well, now that you're not driving the bus, what do we have for you to do? Like, what could you actually be helpful with the skill set that you already have, and so it's like all those parts of ourselves can be an asset or a liability, depending on how much we've integrated them and accepted them and like seen the value and really like come to appreciate them for what they've given us in our lives, and like how they make up this idea of Jonathan or of Noel.
And I think you're saying, just to name it too, you're using the IFS language, internal film systems language, but this is also a way of describing tantric transformation of poison to wisdom. Right? It's not, you're not getting rid of, there is a raw energy there that like, it comes up the wrong way with the wrong view, at the wrong time, wrong perspective. It's poisonous, right? But with the right view and in using it the right time, space, now it's a wisdom. Now it's a Buddha wisdom, a Buddha energy. And so we're not kicking anybody out of the family here, but we're renegotiating who does what when, and with the wisdom and clarity to see what shows up when.
Awesome.
So I just want to make sure to tee that piece up for we all have reactivity to that space. And also, if that reactivity for whatever reason doesn't feel like the time that you want to explore that space, then you let it go. But what we're doing is the revisiting of that space, like the other kinds of rehearsals, or like you're just laying that track over and over again in the mind to familiarize ourselves with it, to make easier access to it, to recognize that that's always available in there, and it gets easier and easier the more and more familiar. We're not actually building more of it. It's always here. We're just becoming familiar with it.
Yeah. Well said. Thanks for the reminder.
Shall we do it?
Let's do it.
All right. Okay. So the first phase here, I'm going to invite people to do a visualization, which means, or imagination is a better word. You can sit in a posture that works for you. Eyes open, eyes closed, especially for a visualization. A lot of people find it more helpful to imagine with their eyes closed. So whatever feels safe for you, whatever feels supportive of entering and utilizing your imagination. Taking a few breaths to just let the body relax. Directing attention at breath just so we have our mind present for a few moments. And what I'm going to ask you to call up is a moment, a relationship, a being. Could be a person you really know, or could be a spiritual being, could be a pet, or maybe it's even a place, a particular place. That in that moment, or with that being, or in that place, you tend to feel a moment of perfect love. It's not that they give it to you, but you're held in such a way that that is evoked from you. Maybe it's what somebody said or didn't say, the way they physically held you, the way you were seen, the way you needed to be seen. Maybe it was the way you were encouraged. Just scan through the mind and think about those who've loved us into being, and there might be one that pings, and just keep visualizing a moment with them. Imagine them right here in the space with you, or imagine yourself in that space, whatever it may be. What did it sound like? What did it smell like? What did it look like? Just steep in this moment. Remembering as many details as you can come up with, and you can make up the rest. It's okay. It's all about re-evoking the felt sense of what that experience was like. Recognize how the body feels. Keep reviewing all the details of that moment until you start to get the felt sense of what it's like to be in that moment, as though it was happening right now, right here. Once you start to get the direct felt sense of being held in that unconditionally loving way, the direct felt sense we're having right now, just realize that we're an extension of that loving field. We are that too. And you can start to let go of that imagined situation, that memory. Shift your focus from building that and reviewing that visualization, imagination, to focusing on the direct felt sense that's been evoked right here, right now. Open, spacious, warm, loving field of awareness. If that direct felt sense fades at all, you can always re-evoke the memory. You can always bring the visualization piece back. once it's evoked, we don't want to hang on to that. We want to focus on the direct experience right here, right now. As we begin to experience that, we might notice parts of our mind react and respond to that. Maybe in ways that are habitual, maybe in unique ways. Thoughts will arise, ideas will arise about it, limiting beliefs about it will arise, maybe emotions will arise and come up. Whatever it is that arises, we're going to allow that to come up. So we're now viewing that from being that unconditional loving space. It's got limitless capacity for everything that comes up. And has no need to hold on to any of it or identify with any of it. And we use that mindfulness skill set to watch when we begin to fuse or identify with or chase after any experience that arises. And we just keep remaining viewing from that, from that awareness space, infinitely loving space. Let it arise. It's all welcome, and we're going to let it go. Loving every part of you. Loving everything that comes up, seeing everything that comes up, allowing, encouraging, loving it all, healing it all, thanking it all. Every aspect of your experience just loved for its very being, just for its being, just as it is. Whenever you're ready, in a formal sense, we can shift out of that meditation. And at the same time, we don't have to change anything about what we're doing or where we're operating from. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Noel. That was amazing. I had a beautiful sense of this podcast being a part of what came up for me. So it did feel very integrative. Yeah.
Are you open to sharing more? What's your experience like with that?
I was fortunate enough to meet my main teacher in the Tibetan, sort of vocabulary, my root teacher, fairly early on in my practice. And, I got to go to Tibet and live for a year and, mostly in his monastery, and really, really amazing things because of that. And then when I came back to the States, like the whole reason I had gone over there was I wanted to do the traditional 3-year retreat.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my other teachers had suggested becoming a translator. And I said, well, I don't have the money or the time to go to like Harvard and do that.
Yeah.
And he said, no, just go over to Tibet and teach English. You'll be fine. And there was this whole plan. and I really trusted in it and had this amazing year, in the end of which I did not take the next step into sort of the translator school. Came back and just went back to like a quote unquote normal life. And between then and the time that came up in the meditation was like almost like 13 years where I didn't see my teacher, even though we live in the same state. Like literally I could get in my car right now and drive for like 3.5 hours and be where he lives. And, you know, and I was kind of disconnected from that part of my life. And my, this is a long story, but, you know, my current partner started to get more interested in Tibetan Buddhism, and as sort of a shamanic practitioner was really attracted to some of the more shamanic aspects of the practice, and really got interested in this particular what's known as a, you know, Dharma protector, these sort of wrathful deities. And she got really curious about wanting to do Mahakala practice. And she calls me one day and she says, did you know that your teacher has a center in Arizona? And I said, uh-huh. And she's like, and he's giving a Mahakala empowerment in like 2 weeks. I'm going. And I was like, that's amazing. Like, can I come too? And so we went up to his retreat center and went to these teachings. And during the break, we went and there's this sort of unique stupa there. It's a Tara stupa. It's a stupa that you can walk in, you can go inside. And before I had gone to Tibet, I camped in the stupa for like a week. And so we're sitting in the stupa. I'm already having these feelings kind of come up. And at that point, my teacher, Garchen Rinpoche, walked into the stupa with a couple of the monks and started doing like the preparation for the actual empowerment that he was about to give. And something happened in that moment where like a lifetime of shame and guilt just fell away. Like I could literally just feel it draining out of my body, and almost like reconnecting to this initial experience of being connected to this teacher. And I was just sitting there weeping and feeling just so loved and supported and accepted and connected. And yeah, that's what came up during the meditation. And so then like it was almost like he kind of came to me at a certain point and was like, do you see how like what you're doing now is connected? Like look at how you're integrating all this stuff, you know. And it was less of like a verbal lesson, but just more of a felt sense of like everything is in this Buddha field together and in connection. And you know, it's not lost on me that I'm about to go to work and, you know, help people, you know, hopefully learn some mindfulness, and, you know, maybe for the first time. So I felt a lot of gratitude for being in the field.
Yeah. It's amazing how sometimes just remembering those things, or remembering a teacher, or even a moment with the teacher, and it's right here, right? Even I could feel that as you were talking about it.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, there it is, right there. Oh.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I can. That to me is like, you know, there's so many things in my life where I've lived in my head, and there's certain moments and certain teachers where it just goes completely beyond that in an instant.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like generally when I see pictures of him or like we'll watch his, you know, his film or something, I cry. I don't even have to be in the physical presence,
Yeah.
but it's been like that since day one,
Yeah.
which is just a amazing, beautiful feeling.
And would you agree with the idea that it is really about the space that someone like that can hold for you, as opposed to, here, I have something to give you?
Oh yeah, yeah. He's just living it by his example. I mean, like the fact that this particular, if we just want to look at him as a human being, you know, that you could be that full of loving kindness and unconditional compassion after being in a prison camp for 20
Yeah.
years, to take it a step further than that and say, I didn't really know that much in terms of I could tell you Dharma, but like actually integrating it and like experiencing it, I didn't really understand that till I went through that prison experience. And I'm so grateful for that experience because that's where I met my teacher. It's like that's so counter to what most people would think of,
Yeah.
in or when they would imagine themselves in that experience. It's just such an example,
Yeah.
you know.
That's beautiful, man. I
Definitely.
appreciate you sharing.
Yeah, thanks for asking, and thank you for the beautiful offering and for the practice. And um, yeah, I want to make sure we leave some space to talk about some of the other offerings that you have. And I also wanted to mention that in addition to having this practice within the podcast, for you to come back to, um, Noel also has 6 different meditations that you can download through his website, Linktree, Instagram, however you connect with him,
Mm-hmm.
that are just as amazing, and definitely encourage you to check those out. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about the upcoming classes that you're offering as well.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Those meditations are there for everybody to support, and like you said, you can go to the bccp.com or Wake Up Sleepy Buddha and get those. There is a course I'm starting that's going to be August 28th. We'll start, and it's called, um, it's a comprehensive meditation course called Cultivating Mindfulness, Compassion, and Insight. And the idea is doing introduction to mindfulness a handful of times. Often people will get to the end of that, and maybe not everybody. It's okay to leave it at mindfulness, but then a lot of people would be curious about what other meditations and things like that. And I did a couple of shorter courses around that and just found it'd be nice to have a little bit more room on each of these topics. So the idea is you can either take this whole course, it's like a semester through December, or take any piece of it. So we'll do mindfulness, then we'll do a half day sit on mindfulness after the mindfulness sessions. And then we're going to do a couple sessions on intention and motivation, learn those types of practices. Then we're going to do compassion, contemplation. We're going to do insight. We're going to do concentration, and then close the whole thing. I think I'm getting the order wrong, but we're going to close the whole thing with a full day sit, integrating all of those. So there are specific meditations in each of those topics and a whole world of them. So the idea is to introduce that sort of world of category of types of meditations and give some examples and practice them, and then show how they all actually go back to the same practice of mindfulness. We don't graduate past that, but we keep injecting different views and, okay, who is practicing mindfulness from what perspective? Even the practice we just did earlier involves mindfulness, but integrated with a couple different pieces and perspectives, right? So it's these little sort of side journeys that go back to feed the main practice and expand on that. So I'm going to do that by Zoom. I'm going to record it so you can watch it asynchronously and participate on the online community. And if you're in Boston, there's going to be an in-person version, JP Center. So you can do the whole thing or whatever pieces of that speak to you.
And we'll definitely add that information to the show page.
Right on.
So that you can easily link to it. Definitely would recommend it. Noel was one of the teachers every teacher within, the Dharma Moon mindfulness teacher training was amazing in their own right. Definitely appreciated Noel's approach And as you just got a chance to get a taste of there, to meditation and to the experience that he brought to the experience.
Well, let's plug
The
that
experience
too.
he brought to the experience.
Let's plug that too, Jonathan. So Dharma Moon, they've got a meditation teacher training cohort that'll start. I think the next one's coming up in October. But they do one every season. There's one that starts every fall, every spring, and they do one in the summer. Right. So that's a 5-weekend meditation teacher training program. That's how Jonathan and I know one another. So that's for those. You can come with no experience in mindfulness. The whole first piece is learning the mindfulness. But the idea is, right, when you leave from that, you would feel confident in conveying how to practice, why to practice, what is the practice of mindfulness, and feel pretty confident in doing that by the end of it. So if anybody's interested in that,
it's a great program.
Yeah, I went through it myself. Yeah,
definitely vouch for it myself. I felt like I was getting into a place where, with my experience, I could cobble together a first class, but then I was getting into the situation where I was teaching second or third, and now I'm like, okay, well, how do I do that? What do I do? What do I do with people that I've already done the first class with? And the teacher training program was invaluable in supporting me stepping into this newer role and feeling more comfortable with it, and can definitely recommend it highly. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Noel, for sharing your wisdom and experience, and just love this conversation. You're definitely welcome back on the podcast anytime.
Thanks, man. Thanks for what you do.
Really a pleasure. Yeah. And I guess we sort of touched on maybe a possible vital point. Is there anything else that is coming up for you as alive in this moment to mention?
To sum it up, it's you're already what you're looking for. It's always right here. It's always right here.
Love it. Beautiful, right here. Beautiful way to close. I sincerely hope you found value and inspiration in this episode. If it struck a chord with you, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could take a moment and leave a review for the podcast. It's a simple, cost-free way to show support and help more like-minded people discover the show. Also, make sure you sign up for my newsletter at bluemagicalchemy.com to be the first to get updates, exclusive content, and insights delivered straight to your inbox. It's a fantastic way to stay connected and keep the cultivation of wisdom going. If you're ready to dive deeper into transformation through integration coaching, breathwork, and meditation, I'm here to support you. One of the best ways to learn about my offerings is on Instagram at bluemagicalchemy, where I post a lot of content to help seekers like yourself learn hands-on methods for their personal exploration and development, just like I do on this podcast. Remember, it's not about the method you chose or the pace at which you travel. The vital point is to consistently show up for yourself in practice. As the saying goes, it's not the destination, but the journey that truly matters. And I'd be honored to accompany you on yours. So please don't hesitate to reach out, connect, share your journey, successes, the challenges, all of it, from just an email, DM, or review away. Let's journey, grow, and transform together. Thanks again for tuning in. Until the next episode, keep exploring, keep growing, and above all, keep practicing, because that's the vital point.